Welcome back, listeners. You're tuning into another episode of Boost Up English on the Learning English with Podcast channel. I'm your host, Andrew, and today we have a very special topic that's often talked about, but not always fully understood. Why are people afraid to speak English? And joining me is Emma, our co-host. Hi, Emma.
Hi, Andrew. Hi, everyone. Yes, this is such a crucial topic because so many learners struggle with it. There's so much fear around speaking English, and it can really hold people back from reaching their full potential. Today, we're going to dig deep into the reasons behind this fear and, of course, offer some solutions.
Right. So, let's kick things off by discussing the most common reason we hear from learners, the fear of making mistakes. Why do you think people are so afraid of making mistakes when speaking English, Emma?
I think it has a lot to do with the fear of being judged. Many learners think that if they make a mistake, others will look down on them or they'll seem less intelligent. This fear is especially strong when people are communicating in a second language. It's almost like they fear losing face.
Yes, that makes sense. It's that pressure to be perfect, right? People worry about their grammar, their pronunciation, even the vocabulary they choose. But in reality, making mistakes is a natural part of learning any language. Why do you think people struggle to accept that, though?
It's hard because in many educational systems, mistakes are often penalized rather than seen as learning opportunities. People are taught to avoid mistakes at all costs. So when they approach language learning, they bring that same mindset. They want to get it right the first time, but language doesn't work that way.
Exactly. And I think another factor is that we compare ourselves to others. People hear someone who's fluent and think, I'll never be as good as them, which can be really discouraging. But everyone has a different learning path. What do you think about this comparison issue?
Oh, definitely. Social media and even classroom environments can make people feel like they're behind or that they should be perfect right away. It's easy to forget that the person you're comparing yourself to might have been learning for years or is simply more comfortable making mistakes. Comparison is a trap in language learning.
That's so true. Another issue we should talk about is fear of embarrassment. People often feel embarrassed if they say something wrong, and that can cause them to shut down. How can learners overcome this fear?
I think a good way to approach it is to reframe how you see mistakes. Instead of viewing them as embarrassing, try to see them as stepping stones to fluency. Everyone gets things wrong sometimes, and if you're open to it, you can actually learn from those moments. A lot of it comes down to mindset.
Absolutely. It's about shifting from a fixed mindset where you think you have to be perfect to a growth mindset where you see mistakes as part of the process. Another important point to mention is confidence. Many learners feel they lack confidence when speaking English. How can they build that up?
Confidence builds with practice. The more you use the language, the more comfortable you'll become. Start with small conversations, maybe with a friend, or even practicing in front of a mirror. Celebrate small wins. If you can say a sentence or express an idea, that's progress. Over time, your confidence will grow.
That's great advice. I've also heard from learners who are afraid of being misunderstood, and that can really stop them from speaking. What would you say to someone who's worried about not being understood?
I understand that fear, but communication is more than just perfect language. Even if you make mistakes, the person you're talking to will probably still understand your message. And if they don't, they'll ask for clarification. It's okay to repeat yourself or explain something differently. Misunderstandings happen even in our native languages.
That's a great point. Communication is about getting your message across, not about perfection. And I think learners can take comfort in that. Now let's talk about cultural factors. Do you think that in some cultures there's more pressure to speak English perfectly?
Oh, definitely. In some cultures, there's a strong focus on accuracy, and that can create a lot of pressure. People are often taught that making mistakes is unacceptable, which makes them even more nervous when speaking. But English, like any language, is about fluency first, accuracy second. It's okay to make small errors as long as you're communicating effectively.
That's such a valuable reminder. The goal is to communicate, not to be flawless. I also think that the fear of public speaking adds another layer of anxiety, especially when you're speaking English in front of a group. Why is that so intimidating for people?
Public speaking is tough for most people, and when you add the challenge of doing it in a second language, it's easy to see why it's intimidating. You're in front of an audience, and all those fears of being judged, making mistakes, and being misunderstood are amplified. It's a lot of pressure.
Right? And that anxiety can make people freeze up, or they avoid speaking altogether. What are some strategies learners can use to manage their fear of public speaking in English?
A good starting point is preparation. Practice what you're going to say. Even writing down some key points can help you feel more confident. Another tip is to focus on your breathing. When we're nervous, our breathing becomes shallow, which can increase anxiety. Taking slow, deep breaths can calm you down and help you focus.
That's so practical. I think one thing that might help learners is to realize that the audience often isn't as critical as they fear. Most people are supportive and want to understand what you're saying. How do you think learners can shift their perspective on this?
That's an excellent point. Learners should remember that people are usually more focused on what you're saying than how you're saying it. And honestly, most people are impressed when someone speaks another language, even if it's not perfect. It's about connecting, not impressing.
Exactly. Now, I want to address another key issue. A lot of learners feel their vocabulary isn't good enough, and that can stop them from speaking. What advice do you have for learners who feel this way?
This is such a common concern, but it's important to remember that you don't need to know every word to speak effectively. Start with the words you do know. If you're missing a word, you can describe it or use a simpler phrase. Over time, your vocabulary will grow, but don't wait until it's perfect to start speaking.
That's excellent advice. You don't need a vast vocabulary to communicate your ideas. Just keep it simple, and you'll be able to engage in conversations. What about pronunciation? Some learners feel self-conscious because they think their accent is too strong. How should they approach this?
First of all, having an accent is completely normal. Everyone has an accent, even native speakers. The goal is to be clear, not to sound like a native. If your pronunciation makes it hard for people to understand you, then it's something to work on. But if people can understand you, don't worry about your accent. It's part of who you are.
That's such an important perspective. Accents are part of our identity, and as long as you're understood, that's what matters. Another aspect I'd like to explore is the learning environment. How does the environment someone is learning in affect their fear of speaking English?
The learning environment plays a huge role. If you're in a classroom or group where mistakes are criticized or where there's a lot of competition, it can really increase anxiety. On the other hand, if you're in a supportive, encouraging environment, it becomes easier to take risks and speak without fear.
That's such a good point. Creating a safe space for learners to practice speaking is key. What should learners do if they find themselves in a more critical or judgmental environment?
If you're in an unsupportive environment, try to find other opportunities to practice. Look for language exchange groups, online communities, or even just a friend who can practice with you in a judgment-free zone. The more positive experiences you have, the more your confidence will grow.
That's great advice. So Emma, let's talk solutions. What are 3 practical tips you would give learners to help them overcome their fear of speaking English?
First, start speaking as soon as possible, even if it's just with yourself. The earlier you start, the more confident you'll become. Second, focus on fluency over accuracy. Don't stop every time you make a mistake. Keep the conversation going. And third, surround yourself with people who encourage you to practice, whether that's online, in person, or through apps.
Those are really helpful tips. I also think recording yourself can be a great way to track your progress. It allows you to hear how much you've improved over time. What do you think about using technology to practice speaking?
I think technology is a fantastic resource. There are so many language exchange apps, AI chatbots, and even speech analysis tools that can give you feedback on your pronunciation and fluency. These tools make it easier to practice speaking without feeling judged.
Exactly. There are so many resources available today that can help learners overcome their fears. Before we wrap up, what would you say is the most important mindset learners should have when tackling their fear of speaking English?
The most important mindset is to be kind to yourself. Language learning takes time, and it's okay to make mistakes along the way. Every time you speak, you're improving. Celebrate your progress, no matter how small, and keep pushing forward.
I love that. Being kind to yourself is such a powerful mindset shift. Well, Emma, we've covered a lot of ground today, and I hope our listeners feel more confident about tackling their fears. Any final words of encouragement for them?
I'd say to our listeners, you've got this. Speaking English might feel scary now, but with practice, patience, and the right mindset, it will get easier. Don't let fear stop you from reaching your goals. You can do it.
Great words to end on. Thank you, Emma, for joining me in this deep dive into the fear of speaking English. And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in to Boost Up English. Don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on future episodes and keep practicing. We'll see you next time.
Yes, thanks everyone. Keep practicing, stay positive, don't hesitate to comment on the issues you're facing. Your comment might become a discussion topic in the next podcast of the Boost Up English series. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next episode.